Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to another captivating story on our channel. Today, I'm thrilled to share the tale of Clara, a dedicated 23-year-old housekeeper working in the grand mansion of a wealthy businessman in Feira de Santana. One fateful night, she's asked to pretend to be the wife of her employer, Eduardo, at a crucial business dinner. What starts as a simple act of deception quickly escalates into something far more intense when they share their first kiss. But can this budding love overcome the vast social divide between them? And when Clara discovers she's expecting a child, how will Eduardo react? Will he turn her away? Or will this news bring an unexpected twist no one saw coming? A heartfelt thank you to all of you who faithfully follow Fio de Esperanza. Your likes, subscriptions, and shares keep us going every day. Your support means the world to us. Tell me in the comments, what do you do while listening to our stories? Are you relaxing on the couch after a long day, sipping a warm cup of tea, preparing dinner, or commuting home from work? I love hearing how you make time for us. Now, let's dive into the story. Clara had always been an organized and devoted young woman. For the past 2 years, she had worked as a housekeeper in the opulent mansion of Eduardo, a 32-year-old millionaire entrepreneur who lived alone in one of Faraday Santana's most stunning homes. Her days followed a steady routine, arriving early, handling the cleaning, organizing everything meticulously, preparing meals, and ensuring the house was flawless by the time he returned from work. The mansion was magnificent, with manicured gardens, a vast swimming pool, and breathtaking city views. Clara knew every corner of the place intimately. She understood exactly how Eduardo liked his morning coffee, which music soothed him after a tough day of deals, and that he grew quiet when worried about a big contract. She observed it all in silence, always discreet and professional. Eduardo was a handsome man, tall, with neatly styled dark hair and serious brown eyes that softened with a kindness few ever saw. He treated Clara with respect, never rude or dismissive. He paid her on time, granted her days off when needed, and always thanked her for her efforts. "Thank you, Clara. The house looks perfect, as always," he'd say upon arriving home, and her heart would skip a beat each time. Yet, Clara knew her place. She was the housekeeper. He was the wealthy boss. Their worlds were worlds apart. Still, she couldn't help admiring him, not just for his riches or looks, but for his hard work, fairness to his staff, and the way he cared for his elderly parents in a nearby estate. Eduardo had a human side that shone through when he thought no one was watching. Clara lived with her mother, Senora Maria, in a modest house in the Camadinha neighborhood, far from the upscale area of Eduardo's mansion. Every morning, she took 2 buses to get to work, but she never complained. The pay was good, better than any job she'd had before, and Eduardo often gave her extra money at year's end or on special occasions. "My daughter, you work yourself to the bone in that big house?" Senora Maria would say, when Clara came home exhausted but content. "That man is lucky to have you looking after everything." Clara would just smile, knowing her mother didn't realize it wasn't just a job for her. There was something deeper, a feeling she tried to hide even from herself. Eduardo was single, as everyone knew. Occasionally, He'd entertain beautiful, well-dressed women from his social circle, and Clara would prepare elaborate dinners, set the finest tableware, light candles, and make it all seem magical. Then, in the morning, she'd quietly clean up after they left, ignoring the odd twinge in her chest. Lately, Eduardo's parents, Senor Roberto and Senora Helena, had been visiting more often. Clara adored them. Senora Helena would chat with her in the kitchen, asking about her family and praising her cooking. "Clara, dear, you cook better than any fancy restaurant in town," she'd say. Senor Roberto was more reserved but always polite. During Sunday lunches, Senora Helena would tease, "Eduardo, my son, you're past 30 now. When will you give me grandchildren?" Clara overheard these conversations while preparing dessert. "Mother, when the right person comes along, you'll be the first to know," Eduardo would reply patiently, though Clara could sense his discomfort. On weekends, when Eduardo worked from his home office, Clara took the time for a thorough clean. She enjoyed the quiet moments, listening to the classical music he played to focus. Once, while she organized the library, he came down for coffee and caught her. "Do you read a lot, Clara?" he asked, noticing her careful handling of the books. "A little, Senor Eduardo, when I have time," she replied, blushing. "Feel free to borrow any book you like," he offered with a gentle smile. At 23, Clara had never had a serious relationship. She'd gone on a few dates with local guys, but nothing felt right. She was a lovely young woman, with long brown hair, usually tied in a neat bun for work, expressive green eyes, and a sweet smile that lit up her face. But she was naturally shy, especially about romance. "Clara, you're too young to just take care of rich people's houses. And your old mother," Senora Maria would say. "You need to find a boyfriend and start a family." Yet, Clara couldn't muster interest in the men her mother suggested. There was something different stirring in her heart, something she couldn't quite explain. Eduardo traveled often for business, and Clara missed him when the house felt empty for days. She'd tend to everything with the same care, watering the plants, keeping it spotless. But the silence was different without him. When he returned, he'd always bring her small gifts, a special chocolate, a pretty scarf, or a book he thought she'd enjoy. "Thank you, Senor Eduardo. You didn't have to," she'd say, though she cherished each one. "You take such good care of my home, Clara. It's the least I can do," he'd reply with a smile. These gestures made her heart race, even if she knew it was just kindness. Clara's life was calm and predictable, and she was content. She loved her job, adored Eduardo's family, and had a good rapport with him, while helping her mother financially. She never imagined it would all change because of one business dinner Eduardo had to attend, a night that would transform their lives forever in ways neither could foresee. Eduardo was in a panic. He paced his office in the mansion, running his hands through his hair in a way Clara had never seen. It was a Tuesday morning, and she was arranging books on the shelves when she noticed something was terribly wrong. He muttered to himself, checked his phone every few minutes, and wore an expression of sheer dread. "I can't believe she did this to me," he grumbled as he strode back and forth. Clara tried to focus on her tasks without intruding, but it was impossible to ignore. Eduardo stopped at the window, staring out at the garden without really seeing it. "How am I going to fix this now?" he whispered. As she finished and quietly headed for the door, he turned and spotted her. "Clara, wait," he called, his voice weary. "I'm sorry. I must look like a madman. She paused in the doorway, concern etched on her face. Is everything all right, Senor Eduardo? He sighed deeply and sank into his leather armchair. Remember Fernanda, that model who's visited a few times? Clara nodded. How could she forget the most stunning woman she'd ever seen, who treated her like she was invisible? We were, well, not officially together, but we'd been seeing each other for months. Last night, she called to say she's with some famous actor now and doesn't want to see me anymore. Clara felt a strange pang in her chest, part relief, part sympathy. I'm so sorry, Senor Eduardo, she said softly. He laughed bitterly. That's not the worst of it, Clara. The real problem is I have the most important dinner of my career the day after tomorrow, Thursday. A Spanish investor, Senor Martinez, is flying in from Madrid just to meet me. This deal could revolutionize my company. He stood and began pacing again. Martinez is very conservative and traditional. He only does business with men who are married or in stable relationships, believing single men are unreliable for long-term investments. I already told him I'd bring my wife to the dinner. His wife, Senora Carmen, is eager to meet a Brazilian woman. Now, if I show up alone or admit I'm not with anyone, he'll pull out immediately. It's 15 million reais on the line, Clara. He leaned on his desk, desperation in his eyes. I've called every woman I know, but they're either taken, out of town, or can't convincingly play the part for something this big. I need someone intelligent, polished, and at ease in a formal setting. Clara stood silently, unsure how to comfort him. It was the first time she'd seen him so vulnerable, stripping away his usual confident facade. I'm sure you'll find a way, Senor Eduardo, she said, trying to encourage him. Then he looked at her directly, and something shifted in his gaze, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. Clara, he began slowly, how long have you worked here? 2 years, Senor Eduardo, she replied, puzzled. And you've always been so polite, elegant, even in your uniform. You speak well, you're smart, and you know this house better than I do. She blushed at the compliments, but still didn't understand. Clara, I'm about to make a crazy proposal, but I'm desperate. Would you consider pretending to be my wife for just one night at the dinner on Thursday? It would be purely an act, nothing more. Her eyes widened in shock. What do you mean, Senor Eduardo? He ran his hands through his hair again. I know it sounds insane, but think about it. You're beautiful, intelligent, and well-mannered. With the right clothes, hair, and a bit of preparation, you'd fit right in at an upscale restaurant. And since you know me so well, how I think, how I act, it would be easier for you than for a stranger. Clara was speechless. The idea was so outlandish, she could hardly process it. But Senor Eduardo, I'm your housekeeper. How could I possibly pretend to be your wife? I don't even know how to behave in those fancy circles. You're selling yourself short, Clara, he said sincerely. I've watched you for 2 years. You have a natural grace and education that money can't buy. You read, express yourself clearly, and have excellent taste. With the proper outfit, no one would suspect a thing. He paused. And I'd make it worth your while. 5,000 reais for the night. That could make a real difference for you and your mother. Her heart pounded. 5,000 reais was more than 2 months' salary. It could fix their roof, buy medicine, and more. But the situation felt surreal. I don't know, Senor Eduardo. What if it all goes wrong? What if they figure out it's a lie? It won't, he assured her, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. I'll help you every step of the way. You'll have all of tomorrow to prepare. We'll shop for clothes, get your hair done, and I'll brief you on my life, how we met, and anything they might ask. Clara met his eyes, seeing the genuine plea and trust there. For the first time in 2 years, she felt truly needed by him, not just as an employee, but as a person. And after the dinner, what happens here at home? Everything goes back to normal, he promised quickly. You remain my housekeeper. I remain your employer. No one else will know. It's our secret. He looked at her earnestly. Please, Clara, I really need your help. I have no one else I can trust. Clara took a deep breath. The idea was wild, risky, and completely outside her comfort zone. But there was something in Eduardo's plea, in the faith he was placing in her, that stirred her heart. And the money would change everything for her and her mother. All right, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I accept. A wide grin broke across Eduardo's face, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all morning. Really? You really accept? Clara nodded, still in a state of shock at her own decision. Thank you, Clara. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. On Wednesday morning, Clara awoke to the sound of her own pounding heart. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with everything that was about to happen. She arrived at the mansion earlier than usual and found Eduardo already awake, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He exuded an energy entirely different from the day before, more vibrant, more confident. Good morning, Clara. Ready for your transformation day? He said with a bright smile. Clara was still a bundle of nerves, but his enthusiasm was contagious. Good morning, Mr. Eduardo. To be honest, I'm a little terrified of all this. Eduardo stood and walked over to her. It's all going to be fine. You can trust me. Today you're going to see just how capable you are. He had everything planned. First, they would go to the mall in Ferre de Santana to buy a suitable outfit for the dinner. It needs to be elegant, but not too flashy. Martinez and his wife are conservative. So, nothing with a low neckline or too tight, he explained as he drove. Clara just nodded along, still trying to process the reality of her situation. Their first stop was a high-end women's boutique. Clara had never set foot in such a place. The saleswomen eyed her simple clothes with a certain suspicion, but their demeanor shifted completely when Eduardo explained they needed a special dress for an important dinner. What kind of event? The most experienced saleswoman asked. A business dinner with international investors, Eduardo replied. It needs to be sophisticated, but not too bold. Something a devoted wife would wear to accompany her husband to an important meeting. Clara blushed when she heard him refer to her as his wife, even if it was just for the saleswoman's benefit. The woman brought out several options: a navy blue dress, a simple black one, and an elegant burgundy number. Clara tried them all on, with Eduardo offering his opinion on each. The navy blue is perfect on you, he said when she emerged from the fitting room. It's not too flashy, but it brings out your green eyes. It's exactly what we need. After the dress, they bought shoes, a small, discreet handbag, and some simple accessories. Eduardo insisted on paying for everything, despite Clara's protests that it was far too much. Clara, this investment could change my entire life. Don't worry about it, he said, handing his credit card to the cashier. During their shopping trip, they talked more than they had in 2 years of living under the same roof. Eduardo spoke of the pressure he felt to grow the company, of the difficulty of competing with more experienced businessmen. Clara talked about her dreams, about wanting to give her mother a better life, about the books she loved to read. You never told me you liked classic literature, Eduardo said, surprised when she mentioned a few authors. You never asked, Clara replied honestly, without a hint of complaint in her voice. Eduardo laughed. You're right. I guess I was too focused on work to notice who you really are. After shopping, they went to a beauty salon Eduardo had booked. Clara's nerves returned. I've never done anything like this, she whispered to him as they waited. Relax. It's going to be wonderful. You're going to be even more beautiful than you already are, Eduardo said, and Clara felt her heart flutter at the compliment. The hairstylist removed the elastic from Clara's hair, letting her brown locks fall over her shoulders. What beautiful hair! We'll do a styled blowout. Nothing too elaborate, something elegant and natural, she said. Clara sat tensely in the chair, but Eduardo stayed nearby, talking and making jokes to help her relax. When it was time for makeup, she was even more nervous. I never wear makeup day to day, she confessed to the makeup artist. Don't you worry, dear. We'll do a natural look that enhances your beauty without overdoing it. Eduardo watched everything attentively, offering opinions on colors and making suggestions. While the makeup artist worked, he took the opportunity to coach Clara on the details of the life they were about to pretend they had. We'll say we met 3 years ago, when you were still in college. You were studying business administration, but you stopped to dedicate yourself to taking care of the house and supporting me with the business, he explained. Clara absorbed every detail. And if they ask about our wedding, how long have we been married? Eduardo thought for a moment. We'll say we got married a year ago, in a small ceremony with just family. You're more reserved, not a fan of big social events, which is why you don't appear with me in public very often. Clara found the story convincing. What about children? They might ask, she said, blushing slightly. Eduardo's expression turned serious for a moment. If they ask, you can say we don't have any yet, but we want them soon. That's normal for a young couple. Clara agreed, but she felt a strange pang in her chest, imagining having children with Eduardo, even if it was just pretend. When the makeup was done, Clara hardly recognized herself in the mirror. Her green eyes were enhanced, her skin looked flawless, and her lips had a soft yet defined color. She was beautiful, but she was still herself. Wow, Clara, you look stunning, Eduardo said, and for the first time, she saw real admiration in his eyes. Now, let's go home so you can get changed and see the whole look come together, he said. On the way back to the mansion, he continued coaching her. Martinez likes to talk about wine. If he asks you anything, just smile and say you don't know much, but you appreciate a good glass of red, he added. His wife, Doña Carmen, is very polite, but she might ask personal questions. Just be sweet and smile a lot. At the mansion, Clara went to the guest room to change. When she looked in the mirror, wearing the navy blue dress, the new shoes, with her hair and makeup done, she couldn't believe the transformation. She looked like a completely different person, yet, at the same time, she was still herself. She went downstairs to show Eduardo the final result. He was in his office, working on his computer. Clara cleared her throat softly at the doorway. When he looked up, he froze completely. For a few seconds, he said nothing, just stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. You're perfect, he said, finally rising from his chair. Absolutely perfect. No one will suspect a thing. Eduardo approached her slowly, and Clara felt a strange flutter in her stomach. It was the first time he had truly looked at her as a woman, not as his employee. "Are you sure you can do this? Pretend to be married to me?" he asked, stopping just in front of her. Clara could smell his cologne, could see the details of his face she'd never noticed from so close. "I'll do my best," she answered, her voice a little shaky. Eduardo smiled. "It won't be difficult. You already know my tastes, my habits, my quirks. In some ways, you know me better than any girlfriend I've ever had." Clara blushed at the comment. There was something different in the air between them, a tension that had never existed before. "Tomorrow night, at the restaurant, you won't be my employee. You'll be my wife. That means you can call me by my first name. You can be at ease. You can even touch me, if necessary, to make it look natural," Eduardo explained. "I know it will be strange at first, but it has to look real." Clara took a deep breath. "I understand. I'll do my best not to disappoint you." Eduardo took her hands in his, a gesture that made her heart race. "You won't disappoint me, Clara. I trust you completely." In that moment, looking into each other's eyes, they both felt something shifting between them, something that went far beyond a simple performance for a business dinner. On Thursday night, Clara was more nervous than she had ever been in her life. She spent the entire day mentally rehearsing everything Eduardo had taught her, repeating the details of their fabricated story. When it was time to get ready, her hands were trembling so much she could barely apply her lipstick. Eduardo knocked on the guest room door at 7 o'clock. "Clara, are you ready? We need to leave in 15 minutes. She opened the door, already dressed and ready, but with a look of panic on her face. "Eduardo, I don't know if I can do this. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they realize it's all a lie?" Eduardo took her hands gently. "Breathe. You've got this. I'm sure of it. Remember everything we talked about yesterday? You know me better than anyone. Just be yourself, but as my wife." Clara took a few deep breaths, trying to calm herself. In the car, on the way to the restaurant, Eduardo continued to give her tips. "The restaurant is the most elegant in Feira de Santana. Martinez chose it himself. There will be very formal waiters, lots of menu options. If you don't know what to order, let me choose for you." Clara just nodded, concentrating on not fainting from nerves. "And Clara," Eduardo said, glancing at her as they stopped at a red light, "the moment we step out of this car, you are my wife. That means I might hold your hand, put my hand on your back, or put my arm around you. Don't be startled if I do. It's just to make it look natural." Clara's stomach twisted, but not from nerves. It was a different feeling, one she didn't want to analyze too closely. The restaurant was truly impressive. Clara had never been anywhere so luxurious. The maitre d' greeted them politely and led them to a reserved table, where a couple in their 50s was already seated. Eduardo held Clara's hand as they walked, and she felt an electric current shoot up her arm. "Mr. Martinez, Doña Carmen, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," Eduardo said with a warm smile, extending his hand. "And this is my wife, Clara." Clara smiled as naturally as she could and greeted the couple. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Doña Carmen was an elegant woman with neatly coiffed gray hair and expensive but understated clothes. Mr. Martinez had a serious demeanor, a well-groomed mustache, and the posture of a seasoned businessman. "The pleasure is all ours, my dear," Doña Carmen said, with a soft Spanish accent. Eduardo has spoken so much about you in our phone calls. For the first few minutes, Clara was tense, measuring every word, but Doña Carmen was so kind and welcoming that she began to relax. They talked about Feira de Santana, about the cultural differences between Brazil and Spain, about cuisine. Clara discovered she was more at ease with conversation than she had imagined. And how did you two meet? Doña Carmen asked with genuine curiosity. Eduardo looked at Clara with an affectionate smile. You tell them, love, he said, and Clara's heart skipped a beat when he called her love, even knowing it was an act. We met 3 years ago, Clara began, recalling the story they had rehearsed. I was still in college, studying business. Eduardo needed some help with a few projects, and a mutual friend introduced us. It was one of those instant connections, you know? She glanced at Eduardo, and for a second, almost believed her own story. How romantic, Doña Carmen sighed. And when did you decide to marry? Eduardo took Clara's hand on the table, lacing their fingers together. It was natural, he answered. After 2 years together, we couldn't imagine life apart. We married last year, in a small ceremony with just family. The dinner was going better than Clara could have ever imagined. The food was delicious. The conversation flowed smoothly, and Mr. Martinez seemed to be warming to Eduardo. They talked about business, about plans for the future, about the importance of family in their ventures. Do you plan on having children soon? Doña Carmen asked, and Clara nearly choked on her wine. Eduardo squeezed her hand gently. We want them very much, he replied. Clara has always said she wants a big family. I grew up in a close-knit family myself, and I want to pass that on to our children. Clara smiled, trying to look natural, but she could feel her face burning. There was something in the way Eduardo spoke about having children with her that made her heart race in a dangerous way. Even knowing it was a performance, she couldn't help but imagine what it would be like if it were real. The conversation continued lively. Mr. Martinez told stories from his youth when he was just starting in business. Doña Carmen spoke of her children and grandchildren in Madrid. Clara was surprised to find herself participating naturally, asking questions, laughing at jokes, and feeling at ease in an environment that had once seemed so intimidating. It was as they were finishing dessert that Mr. Martinez made a comment that changed everything. It is wonderful to see a couple so in love, he said, raising his wine glass. You two remind me of Carmen and me when we were younger. That look of true love. Doña Carmen agreed, her eyes glistening. It's true. You are overflowing with love. Eduardo, you never stop looking at Clara, and she blushes every time you speak. It's beautiful to see. Clara's face turned crimson because she knew that some of it wasn't an act. Eduardo really had been looking at her differently all night. You know what you two must do? Mr. Martinez said, clearly moved by the wine and the romantic atmosphere. You must kiss right here in front of us. I want to see this true love. Doña Carmen clapped her hands in excitement. What a lovely idea. Go on, dears. A little kiss to seal this special moment. Clara felt the world stop. She and Eduardo locked eyes, and she saw the same panic reflected in his. How had they not considered this possibility? Other patrons in the restaurant began to look toward their table, curious about the Spanish couple's enthusiasm. Come on, Eduardo, Mr. Martinez insisted, his voice now a little too loud. Show your wife how much you love her. Heads turned at nearby tables, an expectant hush falling over the diners. Clara froze. Her mind raced, but her body was paralyzed. It was then that Eduardo noticed the first signs of her panic. She began to stammer a weak excuse, her hands trembling visibly, the color draining from her face. If she crumbled now, it would ruin everything. The $15 million deal would vanish into thin air. On a protective impulse, Eduardo turned to her. He framed her face with his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle, and murmured, "Trust me." Before she could answer, he pressed his lips to hers in what was meant to be a swift, theatrical gesture. But the moment their lips met, something ignited. The kiss, intended to last no more than 2 seconds, deepened into something intense, real, charged with a desire neither of them knew existed. Eduardo pulled her closer, and Clara responded instinctively, completely forgetting where they were. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Clara's eyes remained closed, the ghost of his lips still on hers. He was gazing at her with an expression she had never seen before, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. "Bravo! Bravo!" Mr. Martinez exclaimed, applauding enthusiastically. Mrs. Carmen was visibly moved, her eyes glistening with tears. "How beautiful! This is the kind of love we want to support with our investments." Others in the restaurant joined the applause, charmed by the romantic display. Clara and Eduardo tried to compose themselves, smiling and accepting the compliments. But a new, palpable tension had settled between them. Their hands brushed on the table, and a jolt of electricity shot through them both. Eduardo found his gaze drawn to her lips, while Clara felt her knees weaken every time he looked at her. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Mr. Martinez approved the investment, praised Eduardo for being lucky enough to have such a special wife, and scheduled the meetings to finalize the contract. But Clara could barely focus on the conversation. Her mind was consumed by the kiss, the feel of his lips, the way he had held her face. When they finally said their goodbyes to the Martinez couple, Clara and Eduardo walked to the car in a thick silence. The tension was almost a physical presence between them. Eduardo opened the door for her, and as their hands brushed again, they both felt that same electric shock. In the car, on the way home, neither of them mentioned what had happened. They spoke of the dinner's success, of how much Mr. Martinez had liked the proposal, of the next steps for the business. But they both knew that something fundamental had shifted between them that night. The kiss had been too real to be forgotten. Clara arrived at the mansion on Friday morning, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had spent the night sleepless, reliving every second of that kiss. She could still taste his lips, feel the press of his hands, the sheer intensity of the moment. She tried to convince herself it was all just an act, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. He was already in the kitchen when she arrived, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. When he saw her, he looked up, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other in silence. The air was charged with something new, a tension that had never existed between them before. "Good morning, Clara," Eduardo said, his voice a little deeper than usual. "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo," she replied, but her voice trembled slightly. They tried to act as if nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Every accidental glance, every spoken word seemed heavy with new meaning. Clara started her chores, trying to concentrate, but she could feel Eduardo's eyes on her. While she was dusting the living room, she noticed he had stopped working in his office and was watching her from the doorway. When she met his gaze, he quickly looked away, pretending to be absorbed in his phone. Martinez called early this morning, Eduardo said, approaching her as she arranged books on a shelf. He's very impressed with you. Said he's rarely met a wife so elegant and polite. Clara paused, a warm blush creeping up her neck. That was very kind of him. Eduardo stood beside her, so close she could smell his cologne. Clara, about last night, he began, but his voice trailed off. She looked at him, waiting, but he seemed to be struggling to find the right words. It was very convincing, he finally said. The performance, I mean. Yes, Clara agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. It was a good performance, but as she said it, a flicker of something, disappointment, crossed his eyes, as if he had hoped for a different answer. They fell silent, both pretending to focus on the books, both thinking of the same thing. At lunch, Eduardo came down to the kitchen, a rare occurrence. He usually ate in his office while he worked, but today he sat down at the kitchen table. You don't have to eat standing, Clara. Sit with me, he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Clara hesitated. She had never shared a meal with him. They had always maintained the professional distance of employer and employee. But there was something in his request that felt sincere, not an order, but an invitation. She sat, trying to appear casual. You're an excellent cook, Eduardo remarked, tasting his food. You always are, but last night was different. Were you nervous? Clara flushed slightly. I was terrified, but it all worked out in the end. Eduardo smiled. You were perfect. Better than any professional actress. As they ate, Eduardo asked questions about her life, things he had never asked before. He wanted to know about her dreams, what she loved to do in her free time, which books had left a mark on her. Clara was surprised by his genuine interest, by the way he hung on to her every word. Did you always want to be a housekeeper? He asked, and Clara noted there was no judgment in his tone, only real curiosity. Not exactly, she answered honestly. But when my father passed away, my mother and I had to make ends meet. Working here has been a blessing. You've always treated me with respect. Eduardo stopped eating and looked at her. Clara, you don't have to call me sir all the time. You can just call me by my name. We're nearly the same age. The request took her by surprise. I don't know if that would be appropriate, Eduardo, she said, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strange, far too intimate. After lunch, Clara returned to her tasks, but she noticed Eduardo seemed to find excuses to be near her. When she was mopping the living room, he appeared, saying he needed to grab a book. When she was tidying his bedroom, he came upstairs to retrieve a document. Each time their paths crossed, that strange electric tension sparked between them. Later that afternoon, Clara was in the garden watering the plants when Eduardo stepped outside to take a call. He paced around the lawn as he spoke, and Clara couldn't help but watch him. When he finished, he walked over to her. The flowers are looking beautiful, he commented, observing her work. You have a gift for taking care of things. Clara smiled shyly. I like watching things grow, seeing them blossom. It's rewarding. Eduardo watched her as she carefully watered a rose bush. You care for everything here with such tenderness, he observed. The house, the garden, me. The last word was barely a murmur, and it sent Clara's heart racing. It's my job, she said, her voice suddenly breathy. Eduardo stepped closer. Is it really just a job, Clara? Before she could answer, his phone rang again. It was an important work call he couldn't ignore. Sorry, I have to take this, he said, stepping away with a frustrated look. Clara stood frozen, the hose still in her hand, trying to process what had just happened. For the rest of the afternoon, they kept their distance, as if startled by the intensity of what was unfolding. Eduardo shut himself in his office, and Clara focused on finishing her work. But the tension remained, growing with every stolen glance, every brief encounter in the hallways. At the end of the day, as Clara was getting ready to leave, Eduardo appeared in the kitchen. Clara, Martinez wants to get to know us better. He and his wife have invited us to dinner again on Saturday at a different restaurant. Clara stopped what she was doing. Does he suspect something? No, just the opposite, Eduardo replied. He was so taken with you that he wants to introduce you to other investors. He said he's rarely seen such a harmonious couple. Clara felt a confusing mix of pride and anxiety. Will you do it? Eduardo asked. It's important to secure the deal. Clara knew she should refuse. She knew she was wading into dangerous waters, that her feelings for Eduardo were becoming hopelessly tangled. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a vulnerability that made her forget all her fears. I will, she said. Eduardo broke into a smile, and in his smile, Clara saw something more than professional gratitude. It was genuine happiness, as if he were pleased not just for the sake of the business, but because he had an excuse to spend another evening with her. Thank you, Clara. Truly. You have no idea how much this means to me. He moved closer, as if to hug her or kiss her cheek in thanks, but stopped midway. They stood there, inches apart, gazing at each other. For a heart-stopping moment, Clara thought he was going to kiss her again. A part of her desperately wanted him to. But Eduardo pulled back, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. See you tomorrow, Clara replied, leaving the mansion with her heart still pounding. On the bus ride home, Clara tried to sort through her thoughts. She knew she was falling for Eduardo, but she had no idea if he felt anything for her or if he was just being kind because she was helping him. The only thing she knew for sure was that she could no longer see him as just her boss. He had become so much more, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. At home, her mother, Donna Maria, noticed her daughter's distraction. You have a strange look on your face, my dear. Did something happen at work? Clara made up a vague excuse, but she spent another restless night, her thoughts consumed by Eduardo and the fragile, beautiful thing that was growing between them. On Saturday, Clara woke with a different kind of anxiety than before the first dinner. This time, it wasn't just nerves about the performance. It was an anticipation she couldn't control. She was going to spend another night pretending to be Eduardo's wife, and with each encounter, it was becoming harder to separate the act from reality. Eduardo picked her up in the middle of the afternoon. Donna Maria was stunned to see the luxury car parked in front of their humble home. Who is that man, Clara? Her mother asked. Her curiosity piqued. Clara had told her she was helping her boss with social events, keeping the details sparse. That's Eduardo, Mom. I've told you about him. Oh, your boss, Donna Maria said, peeking through the window. What a handsome young man. And what a fancy car. Clara blushed. Mother, please, it's just work. But when Eduardo got out of the car and greeted Donna Maria with polished charm, Clara saw the sparkle in her mother's eyes. A pleasure to meet you, Donna Maria. Clara always speaks of you so fondly, Eduardo said, kissing her hand gently. Donna Maria was utterly enchanted. Such a gentleman. Clara, you never told me your boss was so dashing. Clara wished the ground would swallow her whole. In the car, Eduardo laughed. Your mother is delightful. I see where you get your sweetness from. Clara blushed at the compliment. She was very impressed with you. She'll be talking about it all week. Eduardo glanced at her as he drove. And what will you be telling her about these dinners? The truth, Clara replied, that I'm helping you with work events. Eduardo grew thoughtful. Technically, it's not a lie. You are helping me, aren't you? There was an undercurrent in his voice that made Clara look at him, but he kept his eyes on the road. This time, Eduardo didn't need to buy her new clothes. She wore a simple black dress she already owned, which, paired with the accessories he had bought her, looked perfectly elegant. You look beautiful, Eduardo said when she emerged from her room, ready to go. You always look beautiful. The second dinner was at an Italian restaurant, a more intimate setting than the first. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez were already at the table and greeted Clara like an old friend. Dear Clara, what a joy to see you again, Mrs. Carmen said, embracing her warmly. Throughout the meal, the conversation flowed even more naturally than the first time. Clara already knew the couple, their interests, and felt more at ease. Eduardo, too, was more relaxed, and Clara noticed that the affection in his gaze and the touch of his hand no longer felt like an act. You two are an admirable couple, Mr. Martinez said during the main course. There's a harmony between you that is rare to see. Clara, you must be a very dedicated wife for Eduardo to be so successful. Clara smiled, but felt a pang in her chest, a reminder that none of this was real. Eduardo is an easy man to love, she replied without thinking, then froze, startled by her own honesty. Eduardo looked at her, surprised, and she saw a new light in his eyes that sent butterflies fluttering in her stomach. Mrs. Carmen shared stories of her children and grandchildren in Madrid and asked about Clara and Eduardo's plans for a family. We very much want children, Eduardo answered, his eyes locked on Clara's. Clara will be a wonderful mother. The way he said it, the intensity in his gaze, made Clara believe, for a fleeting second, that he meant it. After dinner, Mr. Martinez suggested they go for a drink at a nearby bar. The night is young, and I'm enjoying your company so much. As they walked to the bar, Eduardo slipped his arm around Clara's waist, pulling her close against his side. To look natural, he whispered in her ear, his voice a low, husky timbre that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. At the bar, they settled into comfortable armchairs, and Clara found herself nestled close to Eduardo on the sofa. Every time he turned to speak to her, their faces were mere inches apart. Clara could feel his warm breath against her skin, smell his masculine cologne, and sense the heat radiating from his body next to hers. At one point, while Mr. Martinez was telling an amusing story, Eduardo placed his hand on Clara's thigh. To any observer, it was a natural, casual gesture between a loving couple, but for Clara, it shattered her concentration completely. The warmth of his hand seeped through the fabric of her dress, and an electric current shot up her leg. Are you all right? Eduardo asked softly, noticing she had tensed. Clara could only nod, not trusting her own voice. Eduardo kept his hand there for the entire conversation, and Clara had to fight to control her expression, to hide just how much his touch was affecting her. When they finally said their goodbyes to the Martinez couple, it was nearly midnight. It was a perfect evening, Mrs. Carmen said, embracing Clara. You two are an example of true love. Mr. Martinez shook Eduardo's hand firmly. The contract is practically a done deal. I'll send the papers for you to sign tomorrow morning. In the car, on the way home, the tension was entirely different from their first drive. Clara sensed something was about to happen, but she didn't know what. Eduardo drove in silence, but she could see the tension in the set of his jaw. Thank you again, Eduardo said, as they stopped at a red light. You were perfect tonight. Martinez is completely charmed by you. Clara managed a small smile. They're very kind people. It wasn't difficult. Eduardo glanced at her. Did you really think I'd be an easy husband to love? The question caught her off guard. It was the first time he had directly referenced something she'd said during their performance at dinner. I was just playing a part, she answered. But the words didn't sound convincing, even to her own ears. Eduardo parked the car in front of Clara's house, but neither of them moved to get out. They sat in the quiet of the night, with only the dim glow of a streetlight illuminating the car's interior. Clara, Eduardo began, turning to face her fully. Can I ask you an honest question? Clara's heart began to race. You can. He hesitated for a moment. When we kiss, when I touch you, is it just an act for you too? The question was heavy with a vulnerability she had never seen in him. Clara remained silent, torn between honesty and the fear of its consequences. Eduardo continued, his voice low. Because for me, it's not just an act anymore. He shifted closer to her on the seat. I can't stop thinking about you, Clara. About your smile, the way you look at me, how natural it feels just to be by your side. Eduardo, Clara whispered, unable to say more. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. Can I kiss you? For real this time. Not for anyone to see, not as a pretense. Just because I want to kiss you more than anything. Clara looked into his eyes and saw a sincerity that disarmed her completely. Unable to speak, she simply nodded. Eduardo leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Clara no longer wanted to run from what she was feeling. When their lips met, it was nothing like the kiss at the restaurant. This was soft, tender, and filled with genuine emotion. Clara surrendered to the moment, forgetting all the complications, all the social differences that stood between them. When they finally pulled apart, Eduardo rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything between us, he whispered. Clara closed her eyes, savoring his closeness. I know, she replied. What now? Eduardo took her hands in his. Now, we stop pretending this is just a job. He placed a soft kiss on her forehead. Good night, Clara. We'll talk tomorrow. Clara got out of the car, as if in a daze, barely believing what had just happened. Inside, her mother, Maria, was waiting up for her. So, how was the event? Clara tried to act normal, but she knew her face was betraying her. It was good, Mom. Very good. Maria studied her with a mother's sharp intuition. What's that look on your face, child? You're glowing. Clara went up to her room without answering. She lay on her bed, still tasting Eduardo's kiss, still feeling the ghost of his touch on her skin. She knew, from that moment on, there was no going back. She had fallen completely in love with her boss. And from the way he'd acted, perhaps he was feeling something real for her too. Clara arrived at the mansion on Monday morning, her heart hammering against her ribs. After the kiss in the car, she had spent the entire weekend replaying it in her mind, trying to understand what was happening between them. When she entered the house, she found him in the kitchen, already drinking his coffee. Their eyes met, and Clara felt that same familiar jolt of electricity. "Good morning," Eduardo said, his smile softer than usual. "Good morning," Clara replied, her own voice sounding different, more intimate. They didn't speak of the kiss, but they both knew something fundamental had shifted. The air was thick with a sweet, expectant tension. Throughout the morning, Clara tried to focus on her work, but she could feel Eduardo's eyes on her constantly. While she was cleaning the living room, he appeared under the pretense of finding a book, but he just stood there, watching her. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked, stepping closer. "No, thank you," Clara answered. But as she turned to continue her work, he gently took her arm. "Clara, we need to talk about what happened Saturday night." Her heart leaped into her throat. "I know," she said softly. "Not here," Eduardo continued, glancing around. "Tonight, after you're done, can you stay a little longer? We can talk in my office." Clara agreed, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation swirling inside her. The rest of the day passed in a slow crawl, with both of them avoiding being alone together, as if to not heighten the tension further. That evening, once Clara had finished her duties, she went to the office where Eduardo was waiting. He was sitting in his leather armchair, but stood the moment she walked in. "Sit here," he said, gesturing to the small sofa in the corner of the room. Clara sat, and Eduardo sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Clara, I need to be honest with you," he began, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "What happened between us? It wasn't planned. When I asked you to pretend to be my wife, it was truly just about the business. But something changed." Clara listened in silence, her heart pounding. Eduardo went on. "At those dinners, seeing you shine, talking with you, discovering who you really are, I realized I was falling in love with you. And it's not just a physical attraction, Clara. It's something much deeper." "Eduardo," Clara started, but he gently cut her off. "Let me finish, please. I know the situation is complicated. I'm your boss. You're my employee. We come from different worlds, but I can't pretend I don't feel anything for you anymore." Clara felt her eyes well up with tears. "Do you think it's easy for me?" she said, her voice trembling. "Do you think I don't know we're from different worlds? But I can't pretend anymore either, Eduardo. I've fallen in love with you, and it terrifies me." Eduardo moved closer to her on the sofa. "Why does it terrify you?" Clara took a deep breath before answering. "Because I know that men like you don't end up with women like me. I'm your maid, Eduardo. I come from a poor family. I don't have a college education. I know nothing about your world." "Clara, stop," Eduardo said, taking her hands. "Do you think I care about any of that? You are the most intelligent, kind, and genuine woman I have ever known. In these last 2 years, you've taken better care of me than any girlfriend I've ever had. You know the real me." Clara looked into his eyes, seeing a sincerity that made her want to believe him. "But what about your family? Your friends? What will they think? Eduardo caressed her cheek. My family will love you, I'm sure of it. And if my friends can't see how special you are, then they're not real friends. I'm scared, Clara confessed. Scared of giving myself completely, only for you to get tired of me, to discover that I'm not actually enough for you. Eduardo leaned in until their faces were inches apart. Clara, you are more than enough. You are perfect. He kissed her then, a kiss that was gentle and full of reassurance. Clara kissed him back, feeling all the walls she had built around her heart crumble. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Clara. I truly love you. Tears streamed down Clara's face. I love you too, Eduardo. I have for a long time, but I never thought you could feel the same. Eduardo kissed her tears away. How could I not fall in love with you? You've turned my house into a home and my life into something happier. They held each other for a long time, simply basking in the certainty of their shared feelings. Eduardo stroked her hair, and for the first time, Clara felt completely safe in his arms. Clara, Eduardo said after a while, I want you to know this doesn't have to change anything about your work here. You can keep living at home, maintain your independence. I don't want you to feel pressured in any way. Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. So, what are we? Eduardo smiled. We're a couple in love, figuring out what it means to be together, no rush, at our own pace. Clara smiled back, a lightness spreading through her chest. Can I ask a question? Of course. When did you start to see me differently? Eduardo thought for a moment. I think it was at the first dinner, when I saw you all dressed up and realized just how beautiful you are. But it grew slowly. Every conversation, every smile, every kind gesture. He then asked, what about you? When did you fall for me? Clara blushed. I think from the very first day I worked here. You were always so kind to me. You always treated me with respect. I just never imagined my feelings could be returned. Eduardo pulled her closer. Well, from now on, you can imagine anything you want, he said, and kissed her again. This time, the kiss was more intense, more passionate. Clara felt a sensation she had never experienced before, a deep-seated desire that made her want to give herself to him completely. Eduardo, she whispered between kisses, I've never, I've never been with anyone. Eduardo stilled, looking at her with profound tenderness. I know, my love, and if you're not ready, we can wait as long as you need. Clara cupped his face in her hands. I am ready. I am ready because I love you and because I trust you. Eduardo searched her eyes for any sign of doubt. Are you absolutely sure? Clara smiled. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Eduardo stood and extended a hand to her. Come with me. He led her to his bedroom, his every movement gentle and unhurried. There, he lit a few candles, casting the room in a romantic, welcoming glow. You are so beautiful, he said, stroking her face. Clara was nervous, but she also felt deeply cherished. Eduardo sensed her apprehension. We'll go slow, my love. If you want to stop at any time, you just have to say the word. What happened between them that night was magical. Eduardo was tender and attentive, always mindful of her comfort, constantly asking if she was okay. Clara gave herself to him completely, discovering sensations she never knew were possible. It was her first time, and it was perfect because it was born from true love. Afterward, they lay entangled in the sheets, Clara's head resting on Eduardo's chest. "How are you feeling?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Complete," Clara answered. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." Eduardo held her tighter. "I love you so much, Clara. I can't believe you're mine now." Clara smiled, kissing his chest. "I love you too, and I can't believe this is real." They talked late into the night, making plans, speaking of the future, of what their relationship would be like from now on. Clara knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt brave enough to face them. She had Eduardo's love, and that made her feel like she could conquer anything. In the weeks that followed that magical night, Clara and Eduardo lived out an intense, secret romance. By day, she continued her work at the mansion as usual, but now there were meaningful glances, discreet touches when no one was looking, and an intimacy that grew with each passing day. At night, after Clara finished her work, they would be together, talking, getting to know each other on a deeper level, and making love with a passion that surprised them both. Eduardo had become a different man, more relaxed, happier, always smiling. Clara saw the change in him and felt a quiet pride in being its cause. He talked about officially introducing her to his family, about taking their relationship public. But Clara always asked for a little more time. She was still afraid of how people would react, afraid of not being accepted. "My love, you need to trust in yourself more," Eduardo would say whenever she voiced her insecurities. "My parents will adore you, and even if they didn't, I chose you. You are the woman of my life." Clara would smile when he said things like that, her heart warming, but deep down, a fear still lingered that it was all temporary. The contract with Mr. Martinez had been signed and was going splendidly. Eduardo always made a point of thanking Clara for her help, insisting that none of it would have happened without her. "You've changed my life in every way," he'd say, kissing her affectionately. Clara had changed too. She was more confident, more beautiful. She radiated a happiness she couldn't hide. Her mother noticed her daughter's transformation, but Clara would only say she was happy with her job. "That boss of yours must be treating you very well," her mother would comment. And Clara would blush, knowing it was truer than her mother could ever imagine. It was on a Thursday morning, nearly 2 months after their first night together, that Clara realized she was late. Seated in the grand kitchen of the mansion, she mentally calculated the dates, and the world seemed to spin around her. She was 2 weeks overdue, and her cycle had always been impeccably regular. Panic surged through her veins. How had they not considered this possibility? They had made love so often, with Eduardo always gentle and affectionate, yet sometimes, in the heat of their passion, they had overlooked the necessary precautions. In the beginning, he had been diligent about protection, but as their feelings deepened, desire had sometimes triumphed over caution. "No, it can't be," Clara whispered to herself, though deep down she already knew the truth. For days, her body had felt different, a tenderness in her breasts, a faint morning nausea she had blamed on nerves. Now it all made sense. That entire morning, she couldn't focus on her work. She knocked over a vase of plants, burned the lunch she was preparing. She was clearly shaken. Eduardo noticed something was off. "Clara, what's going on? You're not yourself today," he said, approaching her in the kitchen. It's nothing, she replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. I'm just a little tired. But Eduardo didn't believe her. My love, we promised to be honest with each other. Tell me what's worrying you. Clara wanted to confide in him right then, but fear held her back. What if he didn't want the baby? What if he thought she had gotten pregnant on purpose to trap him? What if he wasn't ready for such responsibility? We'll talk later, she said, dodging the conversation. Eduardo was concerned, but respected her space. For the rest of the day, Clara remained distant, lost in her thoughts, trying to decide what to do. After work, instead of staying with Eduardo as usual, she made an excuse and left early. With trembling hands, she stopped at the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. Back home, she locked herself in the bathroom and took it, even though she already suspected the outcome. 2 lines, positive. Clara sank to the floor and wept, a mix of fear, joy, despair, and love. She was pregnant with the child of the man she adored, but she had no idea how he would react. Their relationship was still new. They were only just discovering each other as a couple. In the days that followed, Clara tried to act normally, but it grew increasingly difficult. She avoided their intimate moments, always finding excuses to leave early. She couldn't meet his eyes without feeling nervous. Clara, please, tell me what's happening, Eduardo pleaded one afternoon, holding her hands. You've been pulling away for a week now. Did I do something wrong? Did I hurt you? No, Eduardo, you didn't do anything wrong, she replied, her heart aching at the worry in his eyes. I just need some time to think about a few things. He grew even more concerned. Think about what? About us? Do you not love me anymore? The insecurity in his voice broke her heart. I love you, Eduardo. I love you so much. That's why I need to think. That doesn't make sense, Clara. If you love me, why are you pushing me away? He said, desperate and confused. We were so happy together. What changed? Clara fought back tears. Everything changed, Eduardo. Everything. She left the room before he could ask more, leaving him utterly lost and frightened. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She imagined every possible scenario. Eduardo overjoyed at the news, angry, breaking up with her, or even asking her to end the pregnancy. Each thought left her more anxious. The next day, Eduardo looked visibly drained, with dark circles under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept either. Clara, I can't take this anymore, he said, as soon as she arrived. If you don't tell me what's going on, I'll go mad. She looked into his eyes and saw his suffering. She realized she was being unfair. He deserved the truth. All right, she said, her voice trembling. But not here. Let's go to the office. In the office, Clara sat on the sofa, her legs shaking. Eduardo sat opposite her, waiting. Eduardo, she began, I need to tell you something, and I'm terrified of how you'll react. Clara, whatever it is, we'll face it together, he said, taking her hands. I love you. Nothing you say will change that. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I'm pregnant, she whispered. Eduardo froze, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. The silence stretched on, feeling like an eternity. Panic rose in her. Eduardo, please, say something, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Are you sure? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded. I took the test 3 times, all positive. He remained silent, processing the news. I know this isn't what you expected, she continued, crying. I know it's early in our relationship, that you might not be ready. I understand if you want to end things, if you think I did this on purpose. Stop, Eduardo said abruptly, moving closer. Stop saying that. He cupped her face, making her look at him. She saw tears in his eyes, too. Clara, my love, do you really think I'd leave you over this? She couldn't respond, just kept crying. He pulled her into a tight embrace. I love you, Clara, and if you're carrying my child, that only makes me love you more. She pulled back to look at him, hardly believing his words. Really? Eduardo smiled through his tears. Absolutely. You're going to be the mother of my child. There's nothing better in the world. Clara collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief. I was so scared you wouldn't want this, she said. He stroked her hair. My love, I want everything with you. I want to marry you, build a family, grow old together. You mean it? She asked, still unsure. He kissed her tenderly. I mean it more than anything. In fact, I don't think I've ever been this happy. He placed his hand on her still flat belly. Our baby is in there. Clara smiled for the first time in days. Our baby, she repeated, savoring the words. Eduardo kissed her again. Now, you'll have to introduce me to your mother properly, he joked, and I'll have to ask for your hand in marriage. The following Saturday, Eduardo took Clara to meet his parents officially. Senora Helena and Senor Roberto welcomed her into their home with curiosity and politeness. Mother, father, this is Clara, Eduardo said straightforwardly. The woman I love and the one I'm going to marry. Helena's eyes widened in surprise. Marry? Eduardo, you've never mentioned to Clara. He smiled, pulling Clara close. It's a long story, Mother. Clara has worked in my home for 2 years. I've fallen for the most wonderful woman in the world. Roberto studied her intently. You're a lovely young lady, Clara. But tell me, do you truly love my son, or are you after his money? The direct question made Clara blush, but she breathed deeply and answered honestly. Senor Roberto, I love Eduardo with all my soul. I've worked for him for 2 years. Seeing him tired, happy, sad, I fell for the man he is, not what he has. If it were about money, I wouldn't have taken so long to accept my feelings. Helena stepped forward and took Clara's hands. Dear, forgive my husband's question, but Eduardo is our only child, and we worry. Clara smiled. I understand completely. I'd ask the same if it were my daughter. And there's more, Eduardo said, taking a breath. Clara is pregnant. You're going to be grandparents. The room fell silent, but soon Helena cried out in joy and hugged Clara tightly. A grandchild! Oh, what wonderful news! Roberto, too, was emotional, embracing Eduardo and then Clara. Welcome to the family, my daughter, he said, and Clara wept, feeling truly accepted. Over lunch, the family chatted excitedly about the wedding, the baby, and the future. Helena wanted to know everything about Clara, her family, her dreams, how she had fallen for Eduardo. She took care of me without me even realizing it, Mother, Eduardo shared. She knew when I was down, made my favorite meals when I was stressed, kept the house perfect. And when did you realize you were in love? Helena asked Clara. From the very first day, Clara replied, blushing. But I never imagined he could feel the same for someone like me. Roberto shook his head. Clara, you seem like a gem. My son is lucky to have found you. The next week, Eduardo met Clara's mother, Donna Maria, officially. She was stunned when she learned her daughter's employer was proposing marriage. My daughter, is this real? Donna Maria asked, still in shock. It's real, Mother. Eduardo loves me truly, and I love him, Clara said, holding his hand. And I'm pregnant. Donna Maria nearly fainted at the news. Pregnant! Oh heavens! But after the initial surprise, she was overjoyed. A grandchild! What a blessing! Eduardo spoke privately with Donna Maria, formally asking for Clara's hand. Donna Maria, I love your daughter more than my own life. I promise to care for her and our child, to make her happy every day. Donna Maria teared up, seeing his sincerity. Eduardo, my daughter has always been special, hardworking, honest, kind. If you see that in her, then you're special too. You have my blessing. The wedding was set for 2 months later, when Clara would be 3 months pregnant. It was a small ceremony for family and close friends, just as she had dreamed. Eduardo insisted on covering everything, but let her choose every detail. I want this to be your perfect wedding, he said, and Clara felt like the luckiest woman alive. They selected a charming little church in Ferra de Santana, followed by a simple yet elegant reception. During her pregnancy, Eduardo became the most devoted future father imaginable. He devoured every book on pregnancy, attended every doctor's appointment, and whispered to her growing belly each night. How's my little one today? He'd ask, kissing it gently. Clara had never been happier. She worked less at the mansion, as Eduardo wouldn't let her overexert herself, and spent more time resting and preparing for motherhood. You'll be the most wonderful mother in the world, he told her, caressing her belly. The wedding day was perfect. Clara looked radiant in her white dress, her 4 month bump subtly hidden by the cut. Eduardo couldn't hold back his tears as she walked down the aisle. You look breathtaking, he whispered at the altar. The families blended seamlessly. Helen and Maria became instant friends, discussing the upcoming grandchild, while Roberto treated Clara like his own daughter. When Clara reached 9 months, Eduardo was more anxious than she was. He barely slept, checking on her constantly. Eduardo, relax, she laughed. The baby will come when it's time. One Tuesday morning, the first contractions hit. Eduardo, she called calmly. I think it's happening. He panicked, rushing around for the hospital bag and stumbling over furniture. Stay calm, love, she chuckled through the pain. At the hospital, he never left her side. You're strong, my love. You can do this, he repeated, kissing her forehead between contractions. When the baby's first cry echoed, Eduardo wept more than Clara. It's a boy, the doctor announced. Overwhelmed with joy, Eduardo held their son, his tears flowing freely. In that moment, their family was complete, a testament to their unwavering love. The moment they placed the baby in Clara's arms, she gazed at his perfect little face and felt a love greater than anything she had ever known. He's perfect, Eduardo whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. Look, Clara, we did this. We made this miracle. Clara was exhausted but radiant as she watched Eduardo hold their son for the first time. What are we going to name him? She asked. Eduardo thought for a moment. Gabriel, our little Gabriel. Clara smiled. Gabriel, it's perfect. Eduardo kissed Clara's forehead, then the baby's. I love you two more than anything in the world. In the days that followed at the hospital, Eduardo barely left Clara and Gabriel's side. He changed diapers, bathed the baby, and slept in the armchair in the room, just to be close. You're going to be an incredible father, Clara would say, watching him care for their son with such tenderness. And you're already the most wonderful mother in the world, Eduardo would reply, kissing her. When the fern returned home, The mansion was decorated with blue balloons and welcome banners. The grandmothers were desperate to hold their grandson. My beautiful little grandson, Donna Helena cried with emotion. What a perfect baby. Donna Maria was just as moved. Clara, my daughter, you've given me the most beautiful gift in the world. Gabriel slept peacefully in his grandmother's arms, already surrounded by so much love. Eduardo watched the scene, his heart overflowing with happiness. He had the woman he loved, a beautiful, healthy son, and a united family. Thank you, he whispered in Clara's ear, for giving me all of this, for making my life complete. Clara smiled, holding his hand. Thank you for loving me just the way I am. 6 months after Gabriel's birth, Clara had fully adapted to her new life as a mother and wife. The mansion in Ferra de Santana had transformed into a true home, with toys scattered across the living room, the sound of a baby's laughter echoing through the halls, and a love that filled every corner. Gabriel was a happy, healthy baby, with his mother's green eyes and his father's charming smile. Eduardo was completely smitten with his son. Every morning, before leaving for work, he would spend at least an hour playing with Gabriel, making funny faces that drew peals of laughter from the little one. Good morning, my prince, Eduardo would say each morning, scooping Gabriel into his arms as soon as he woke up. How did my little champion sleep? Clara would watch from the bedroom doorway, smiling as she saw her husband so devoted to their son. Eduardo had become an even better father than she could have imagined. The family's routine was perfect. Clara, of course, no longer worked as a maid. She was now the lady of the house, a beloved wife and a dedicated mother. Eduardo had hired a cleaner to come twice a week, but Clara enjoyed personally taking care of her home and family. You don't have to do this, my love, Eduardo would always say when he saw her cooking or organizing something. I can hire more help. But Clara would shake her head. I like taking care of our home, Eduardo. It makes me happy. Their families had completely integrated. Donna Helena visited almost every day to see her grandson, always bringing gifts and treats. This boy is going to be spoiled, Clara would laugh, watching her mother-in-law arrive with yet another new outfit for Gabriel. Let Grandma spoil her little grandson, Donna Helena would reply, covering Gabriel in kisses. Donna Maria was also radiant with her daughter's new life. My Clara, how you've changed, she would say, seeing her daughter so fulfilled. You're glowing with so much love. And it was true. Clara was more beautiful than ever, with that special glow of a woman who was happy and loved. Eduardo had changed too. His friends commented on how he was more relaxed, more cheerful, more human in his business dealings. Marriage and fatherhood have done you a world of good, his partner said one day. You're more centered, more focused on what really matters. It's true, Eduardo agreed. Clara and Gabriel showed me what it means to have a real family. Now I work for them, not just for the sake of working. He had learned to better balance his professional and personal life, always setting aside quality time for his wife and son. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Clara was in Gabriel's room, organizing the little clothes that were already getting too small. The baby was growing so fast that every week another outfit no longer fit. Eduardo walked into the room carrying Gabriel, who had just woken from his afternoon nap. Look who woke up hungry, Eduardo said, handing their son to Clara to nurse. She sat in the armchair in the corner, and Eduardo settled on the armrest, watching the scene with a loving smile. You two are the most beautiful thing in the world, he said, stroking Clara's hair. Eduardo, Clara said as Gabriel nursed. Can I confess something? Eduardo grew curious. Of course, my love. You can tell me anything. Clara smiled shyly. Sometimes I find myself thinking about how much our lives have changed, from maid and boss to husband and wife, parents of a beautiful family. Eduardo leaned down and kissed her forehead. And do you regret anything? Clara shook her head quickly. Never. Not for a second. I'm just amazed at how destiny works. If you hadn't needed a fake wife for that dinner, would we have found each other another way? Eduardo interrupted her. Without a doubt. I'm sure of it. You were right there, in my house, taking care of me for 2 years. It was only a matter of time before I realized the treasure I had right in front of me. Gabriel finished nursing, and Clara placed him in his crib. He was sleepy, with the content look of a well-fed baby. Eduardo approached the crib and caressed his son's face. Sleep well, my prince, he whispered. Clara joined Eduardo by the crib, and they stood there, watching Gabriel drift off to sleep. He's growing so fast, Clara commented. It feels like he was born just yesterday. Eduardo wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. Clara, he said, suddenly, a different tone in his voice. She looked at him, curious. What is it? Eduardo gave her a mischievous smile she knew all too well. I was just thinking. Gabriel is already 6 months old. Clara laughed, guessing where he was going with this. So, Eduardo kissed her neck gently. So, maybe it's time we start thinking about giving him a little brother or sister. Clara blushed, but smiled. Eduardo, Gabriel is still a baby. But it doesn't have to be right now, Eduardo continued, hugging her from behind as they watched their sleeping son. I'm just saying, it would be beautiful to give him a little sister. Imagine having a little girl with your green eyes and your sweet smile. Clara leaned her back against Eduardo's chest, her heart fluttering at the thought. Do you really want more children? Eduardo kissed her hair. I want a big family with you, Clara. I want this house to be filled with the laughter of children, with love, with life. A little girl would be lovely, Clara admitted, imagining a tiny daughter in her arms. Gabriel would be a protective older brother. Eduardo turned her to face him. So, shall we start seriously thinking about it? Clara blushed even more. Let's wait until Gabriel is at least a year old. I want to enjoy every phase with him. Eduardo agreed, kissing her tenderly. You're right, we're in no rush. We have our whole lives ahead of us. They tiptoed out of the room, so as not to wake Gabriel, and went to the living room. Clara snuggled on the sofa next to Eduardo, who turned on the television at a low volume. Eduardo, she said, nestling against his chest. I love you so much it sometimes hurts. Eduardo held her tighter. I love you that much too, my love. You taught me what it means to truly love. They stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, enjoying the quiet of the house. The soft sound of Gabriel's breathing from his room. The peace of a happy family. Do you remember that night at the restaurant? When you kissed me for the first time? Clara asked suddenly. Eduardo laughed. How could I forget? You were so nervous, about to blow our cover, and I kissed you to save the moment. Did you know that kiss changed everything? Clara said, looking into his eyes. In that instant, I knew it wasn't just an act. Eduardo caressed her face. I knew it too. That was when I realized I was falling hopelessly in love with my maid. Clara laughed. Ex-maid. And now my wife, Eduardo kissed her softly. The woman of my life, the mother of my children. My partner, forever. Clara felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. Forever, she repeated. From the bedroom, a soft whimper came from Gabriel. I think someone's awake, Clara said, getting up. I'll go see what he wants. Eduardo stood up too. I'll come with you. I love watching you with him. In the nursery, Gabriel was awake in his crib, looking around curiously. When he saw his parents, he broke into a toothless grin that melted both their hearts. Hi, my love, Clara said, lifting him into her arms. Couldn't sleep anymore? Eduardo made funny faces at Gabriel, who giggled happily. This boy has so much energy, Eduardo laughed. He's going to be a handful when he starts walking. Clara kissed her son's head. It'll be even more fun. As they played with Gabriel, Eduardo looked at Clara, and an immense wave of gratitude washed over him. Thank you, he said suddenly. Clara looked at him, confused. Thank you for what? For agreeing to pretend to be my wife that night, Eduardo answered, his voice thick with emotion. For giving me the chance to discover who you really were. For teaching me how to truly love. For giving me the most beautiful son in the world. For turning my house into a home. Clara's eyes glistened with tears. Eduardo, you're the one who transformed my life. You took me from a place of invisibility and made me feel special, loved, important. Gabriel drooled on her shirt, and they both laughed. And you gave us this wonderful gift, she continued, kissing her son. Eduardo wrapped his arms around the two most important people in his life. I love you both more than anything, he whispered. Clara smiled, completely happy and fulfilled. And we love you too, forever. As the sun set over Fera de Santana, the little family remained in the nursery, playing with Gabriel, making plans for the future, and savoring every moment of a happiness that felt like a dream, but was wonderfully real. Clara still couldn't quite believe this beautiful life was hers, but she knew she had found her place in the world, beside Eduardo, raising Gabriel, and dreaming of the children yet to come. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of Clara and Eduardo's story, a story that began with a necessary lie and blossomed into the truest love they had ever known. Clara discovered that love knows no social class when it finds two genuine hearts. Eduardo learned that true wealth lies in having a family to love and protect. That dinner, which seemed to be just an act, was in fact the beginning of a journey that forever changed both of their destinies. Today, they are a happy family, with little Gabriel growing up, surrounded by love, already dreaming of more children to complete their joy. I hope Clara and Eduardo's story has touched your heart as much as it has touched mine. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those you love. In the comments below, tell me what part of the story moved you the most. And don't forget to let us know where you're listening from. Thank you so much for spending this time with us here on the Thread of Hope. Until the next story, and may God bless each and every one of you with much love and happiness.